We're waiting for a couple more people to sign in. But in the meantime, I just wanted to say hello. And my name is Lori Hagan. If you're not familiar, I am a reference librarian here for legal research. I cannot give legal advice, of course, but we do the best we can with information for anybody who has requests for forms and or legal information, books, CLE books, the PBIs, that kind of thing. I'm also the person that arranges the CLEs. And I would like to introduce John Eunice from Bit by Bit. And he directs the business. He's strategic and overall operations of Bit by Bit, providing exceptional high-level expertise and guidance to Bit by Bit's clients. John draws on 2 decades of experience as chief corporate counsel and as a trial lawyer in major corporate and large firm settings. John's wide-ranging portfolio includes litigating sophisticated cases, utilizing complex electronic evidence, and leading digital risk mitigation initiatives, both in the U.S. and internationally. Before joining Bit by Bit, John was assistant secretary and a senior legal advisor at the Pittsburgh headquarters of Covestro, LLC, and prior at Bayer Corporation, advancing his clients' interest in highly regulated industries. Bit by Bit is exclusively endorsed since 2008 by the Allegheny County Bar Association to provide computer forensic and electronic discovery consulting services. Without further ado, here is John. There you go.
Thanks, Lori. Good afternoon, everybody. Happy to be here. We have a hybrid presentation today with some colleagues in the room and some on the Zoom. So if there are questions in the room, just wave your hand and we'll address those live here. And if you have questions in the Zoom, please put them in the chat. I have Lori monitoring the chat for me. So I appreciate the introduction. My background really is in litigation. I was 10 years at Jones Day before going in-house to Bayer and then a Bayer spinoff. I joined Bit by Bit in 2020 as general counsel and then became its CEO later that year. But I still wear a legal hat for my company. I'm still my company's in-house lawyer. So I no longer give legal advice to clients. We help lawyers navigate the challenges that technology presents. And as I hope you'll learn today, help lawyers understand the benefits that technology can bring to your practice and help solve problems both on the plaintiff side and the defense side. So big picture today, we're going to walk through the discipline of digital forensics, what that discipline means, what it is and what it isn't. There's often misunderstandings in the marketplace about what that actually means to attorneys. We'll walk through a use case scenario. Can the evidence hidden on devices like computers and phones really help me win my case or prosecute my case or lose it? We'll then shift into smartphones. In our business, we really see a rise in use of smartphones for work purposes. And so there's a lot of information to be gleaned from those devices using forensic processes. We'll spend a few minutes on social media platforms. Certainly the remote workforce is never going back to fully in the office. It's that's my contention anyway. And so there's a lot of information out there in social media platforms, certainly since COVID's onset hasn't slowed down, and we intend to see organizations, plaintiffs, defendants needing to gather information from social media. Then we'll finally wrap things up into eDiscovery. So the disciplines of forensics and eDiscovery are different. They actually roll into one another, but we'll walk through that and I'll explain at a high level how those two disciplines interrelate. Our company, as Lori mentioned, has been endorsed by the ACBA, but more importantly, half the team are lawyers like me and half are forensic analysts. And so what we typically do is partner with law firms on behalf of end clients, usually a corporation or an individual in many cases, to help them use technology to their advantage. So let's get started on what digital forensics is and isn't. And to do that, we're going to use as a reference model the eDiscovery reference model workflow. So this is the EDRM model that most practitioners refer to when they think about data and how it cycles through the life cycle of a litigation case. So starting on the far left side of the diagram you see before you, that tall orange tower is really a business area called information governance, where organizations need to understand what the corporate records are and what they aren't. So there's a process around defining what records are. And then almost as importantly, where do I store those records to keep them secure and accessible? How do I get access to them? And how do I dispose of them when their useful life is over? So that's a whole other presentation for a different day, but it sort of sets the stage for today. So starting in an organization where your records are and where they're kept are very important for the rest of the EDRM workflow. So now we move into the more litigious aspects of the life cycle, that red box for identifying. The next step of the process is identifying what's important in my case. What is the relevant evidence that I must either put a legal hold on or ask my adversary for. So that's sort of step 2 in the process. Step 3, the purple boxes. Okay, once I know what's important and once I know where it is, and going backwards in this process here, how do I go about preserving and collecting that data? Maybe it's email on Exchange server. Maybe it's information in the company's SAP system. Maybe it's on a file server on computers or phones. These are all processes lawyers need to understand and be aware of to properly guide their clients when they need to access data to review or analyze it. Fourth, the blue boxes. Okay, now once I know what I have, where it is, and how to go get it, how do I make sense of it? And this is really where the digital forensics eDiscovery process comes in, the process, review, and analyze piece of this model. That's where you can use technology, we'll get to in a few minutes, to help you make sense of the data, pull out the wheat from the chaff, to make sense of it and find the hot documents and to find what's really important for your case. And then the end of the process, of course, is producing relevant non-privileged documents to your adversary. So we use this as a reference. We'll walk through the presentation today. We're going to live really in between the red and the blue boxes today, identifying what's important, finding it, preserving it, and then analyzing it. And we have a note here. It's difficult to read the information on the screen from one of the remote participants. They're having a hard time seeing the slides.
Oh,
Get your colleague.
I don't have it. Well, this one's kind of tiny.
Okay. Maybe we'll go to the next slide. Let's see.
We will be putting the slides with the video on our
Okay.
website.
The slides will be circulated. Yeah, great. Okay, so what do we mean by digital forensics? It's the process or discipline of identifying, preserving, documenting, then analyzing digital evidence, usually in the investigative or legal context. And so going back to our reference model, those are those boxes, sort of the second and third boxes, going out to an organization or with an individual, frankly, figuring out where their information is, collecting it and analyzing it. It's often investigative. We get engaged to do all sorts of matters. Maybe it's a family law case where there's a spousal dispute or something, or a custody dispute. It could be a harassment case in the workplace, a trade secret case, a non-compete matter, really any matter where you got to figure out where information resides and how to make sense of it. It's not just data collection. A lot of organizations out there say we do digital forensics. What they really mean is they collect data. The real value in this discipline, which we'll get to in a few minutes, is making sense of what you have before you and actually extracting in layman's terms and lawyers' terms, frankly, the most important evidence. And it's not just eDiscovery. It's a part of eDiscovery, but it's not pure eDiscovery. That, at the end of our presentation, we'll discuss is really using online platforms to review data. This is more investigative in nature and takes it back to the root of the evidence. So how broad can this discipline be applied? It really is, again, these are just a couple ripped from the headlines from what we work with every day. You may think this will never touch my practice, but I promise you at some point it probably will if you have any litigation related aspects of your practice or investigative natures or compliance aspects of it. For example, an employee leaves during a critical project. We're going to go through that in a few minutes. The computers, the phones, the systems they looked at before they left can be analyzed and collected using forensics. Maybe an employee transmits sensitive information outside of an organization. We've had situations for large healthcare institutions, for example, where either intentionally or unintentionally, sensitive data leaves the network that it should be on. And how do you go about getting that, remediating getting rid of it? Class actions. We have a lot of occasions where you have multiple data sources to review and collect across a broad base of custodians. Forensics can be used to analyze that data and collect it and make sense of it. You might have a remote sales force alleging harassment. So the collaboration tools they were using to communicate, the phones they were using to text, the Teams environment, the SharePoint environment, those sorts of things can all be leveraged and used forensically, and I'll get to those in a few minutes as well. And then maybe a subpoena or a Don rate, as they say in the EU, Maybe you have a lot of data to get through in a limited amount of time and have to use technology to get through it. So step one of the process is going and actually collecting that data. So revisiting our workflow here, that's really the identify, preserve, and then collect piece of the eDRM workflow. Go over those in a few minutes, then turn to analysis. So the first step learners should do when they have an issue about electronic data is sitting down with their client and to develop what we call a data map. It's really no magic to this. It's sitting down with the right custodians. Maybe it's the in-house counsel or just the client directly, maybe the IT lead, the business folks, and asking questions such as, what are the devices and accounts in which people are A, permitted to exchange company information, or B, more importantly, even if not technically permitted, can they technically use to transmit information? We often get situations where company policy is to not use a personal cell phone for company use. But at the end of the day, people always do that, or they use, the private email or forward documents home. So having a conversation about where the data resides is the first step, and we'll develop what we call a map here. The most common sources on your screen: computers, smartphones, whether they be company issued or personal in nature, cloud storage locations, that could be like a Dropbox or a Box.com location, corporate or shared networks, that's on the company's servers, external media, thumb drives and hard drives, and social media. So we'll go through at a high level, some watch outs for each piece of collecting these data sources, and then move on to analysis of them. PCs, for example. When you talk about collecting a PC or copying a PC, there's really two different schools of thought here. On the one hand, if you copy someone's computer, what that will get you are the files and documents that person can see as a user. And that might be sufficient for your case. You might only care about the Word documents on their computer or the email they save to their computer. That could be fine. But a forensic image, as opposed to a copy of the computer, can give you much, much, much more. Using forensic tools, you can extract from the computer deleted content. So stuff recovered from unallocated space, content that was deleted by the custodian but not overwritten yet. You can get through forensic tools a registry of all the files and folders they accessed over a particular period of time. This isn't something that the user sees, but the forensic software can extract. There's search history on the internet. You can often recover the sites they were visiting, the email accounts they were using, the cloud storage locations they were using. Whether or not thumb drives are plugged in, the forensic tools can extract that metadata as well. So for example, for Windows machine, going back about 30 days, you can tell down to the serial number what thumb drives were put into the computer and when. It could be important for your case to know that. Might not always be important, but it might be. And with these pieces of information with forensic tools, you can put together a timeline, what the user was doing in a specific time period by touching certain files, searching for certain folders, putting in thumb drives, using the cloud and the like. Of course, with like most things lawyers touch, this is it depends the answer as to how to go about doing these things. The make and the model of the computer will decide or dictate often how collected in a defensible and forensically sound way. But it can be done with Apples and Macs, Apples and Windows machines as well. Turning on to the second most common tool here is company issued smartphones. So a lot of times we're asked to collect cell phones and people assume sometimes that the email that they use their company will be on the phone and other data like that. And that's very rarely the case. Typically what happens there is you use your phone to access the email, which is the company's server, but copies aren't on the phone itself. So you have to actually go back to the server itself. Same with your Gmail or your Yahoo account. I have a Gmail app on my smartphone, on my iPhone sitting next to me. The email really isn't there. It's accessed through the phone, but not gathered from the phone. The other watch out when collecting and talking to your clients is asking your clients, does your company have mobile device management tool installed, or MDM? A lot of folks think wrongly that the MDM tool can be used to extract data. It's quite the opposite. What the MDM tool does, it allows the company to control what backups and collections can be done by the custodian his or herself. It's a control mechanism. It limits what the custodian can actually do to get data off of the phone. And typically it containerizes company data in a specific place on the phone. And so if you need data off the phone, instead of relying upon the MDM tool, you often have to remove it. because it's a barrier to removing the data. It's meant to keep the data tight on the phone. So that's just a question to ask your clients going through data mapping. Question one about what phones are used. Question two, if their company issued, is there MDM installed? Because it might have to be removed to get data off the phone. Just to watch out there. Cloud storage systems is the third common area. So if it's company sanctioned, if it's SharePoint, for example, is in the cloud and there's a lot of data up there, it could take weeks and weeks and weeks to pull data off of the cloud. Just be aware of that. It's not a very quick process. We're also told that, in interview processes, that colleagues aren't supposed to use private cloud accounts like Google Drive or Box.com. But when you sit and talk to them, if they're honest with you, you find that they do use those things. And so that's going to require a level of custodian cooperation to get to those accounts. You need the credentials, temporary credential to pull it down, which can be done. But just a watch out there. If your client just tells you no, they aren't allowed to use cloud storage, our advice is don't take that at face value. Actually have that discussion, but can they? Is it prohibited technically? If it's not prohibited technically, you want to ask about that and make sure you're not missing something. The watch out for attorneys here, of course, is spoliation arguments. You don't want to not ask the right question. And 6 months down the road, something in discovery pops up you should have found about 6 months ago, but you're not asking the right questions up front. So just be mindful about cloud locations and personal cloud storage. Corporate networks, going through our data map here, often considered a system of record for companies. Think of an SAP system for financial records or a Workday system for HR records. It's typically something the company buys a license to. It's centralized and controlled by IT, and usually it's structured. So you want to ask if these are in play for your data needs, who has access to the network, how are they structured that helps folks like us get data out of it, and are there any automated deletion cycles that might apply? Here's a real life example of that from my prior role. So when I was at Covestro and Bayer, the company had automated deletion built into their email environment. So if you received an email in Outlook, it sat in your inbox for 60 days and got auto-deleted. If you folded that email, it sat for 2 years in a folder that got auto-deleted. And the idea was, I think rightfully so, to not have email be a system of record. It's a transient environment. It's custodian-based, not centralized. And so if I left the company within 30 days, unless I was on legal hold, all my email gets wiped. So you didn't want corporate records in email. So they built an auto-delete to force people to store important records elsewhere. Well, if there's a legal hold for a custodian who has automated deletion, you better be aware of that so you can turn the cycle off or collect the data. There's bunch of workarounds there, but you want to ask those questions because if those automated deletion cycles aren't addressed and are allowed to run, again, you might run into evidence spoliation. So just ask those questions up front and make sure that you run through the checklist. Yeah, so there's a really good question in the chat. What if a company uses a platform such as Signal, where it's an encrypted communication app and the communication disappears as soon as it goes away? Telegram is another common one. Very good question. So the answer there is twofold. One, with commercially available forensic tools, the common forensic tools, there is no easy way to get Signal data off of a device. You actually need a tripod and a camera and take screenshots of the communications you care about, as long as they're still there, of course. If they're deleted and they do disappear right away, there are third-party services, extra software that can be purchased. It's very expensive. The government has access to it. Certain third-party companies have access to that software to recover that information, but it's not a sure thing. So if they're using Signal, that's good to know up front, because once that goes away, and unless you have special tools, you're not going to get it back. Great question in the chat. Keep them coming, but that's definitely Signal, Telegram are definitely watch outs. There are certain investigations ongoing with the government now. You read about the press about the recent election where folks are using Signal and Telegram, politicians, and the data's gone. It's just not there anymore. So that's definitely a watch out if your organization uses that to be aware of. Thank you for that question. USB external hard drives, like the cloud storage, this is a similar question to ask your client. A, are they allowed to do it by way of policy? And if the answer is no, are they still able to do it technically? Some companies, for example, and there are ways you can do this, they disable the USB ports on the computers. So you can't actually put a thumb drive in and exfiltrate data. Others just have a written policy against it, but no technical prohibition, meaning that the data could reside on thumb drives. So those can be collected remotely. There is a log of them when they're plugged in to the computer. We'll get to that more in a minute, but it's definitely something to ask about twofold. One is it permitted by policy, and two, is it prohibited technically? And then the last stop on our data map tour, social media and messaging apps. They're becoming more and more popular. You see some common icons on here: Facebook Messenger, Instagram, even outside the workplace, of course, but within the workplace, Slack, Teams. There are now some purpose-built tools. Slack for ONA for Slack, 4IG you see on the screen can be used to collect Salesforce chatter data. Microsoft has certain tools that can be used to collect its forms. X1 can be used to collect things like LinkedIn. The challenge here is that the developers of the tool are constantly changing their code on the front end for security purposes and for rightful purposes. What that means, however, is the industry out there is always playing catch up if your goal is to collect data from those sources. So it's not always a push button. It's much easier, for example, to collect email, to collect a phone or computer. But when we're talking about live breathing apps and social media sites and websites, it's a cat and mouse game. And we're able to do it. We have done it. These are all examples of tools we've collected for litigants, loaded into Relativity or a review platform for review. It just don't expect pristine, clean output all the time. We have a question here in the room, which I'll repeat.
Yeah, if an employee uses his own private password protected information or account on a company computer.
Yes.
Can the company discover what he accessed in his own private password account?
Great question.
While using the company
Yes.
computer?
So for folks on the Zoom, great question. Colleague has a company issued device, say it's a PC. He uses his personal account or a personal based account on the company asset. And the question is, can the company force or get to that personal account because it was accessed on a company device? The short answer is not technically without the custodian's consent. There's no way to get to the account because they're typically password protected. However, most companies do have a policy in place that says, here's your corporate device. Whatever you put on here is company assets, company information, company IP. And so there's an argument to be made if that person accesses their Gmail, for example, on the corporate device. Even though you don't have their password, you at least have a policy reason to go back to the person and say, now cuff up your password. You used our computer to access your Gmail. But to answer your question, technically, without that password, you're going to need to get custodian's cooperation, either voluntarily or compulsory. It's a great question. Okay, so we talked about the main 4 or 5 main areas of data out there that we typically see and how to go about collecting them, some watchouts. Now we're going to get to the fun stuff, the true nature of forensic. And that's the evidence that lies beneath the data that you can collect for a client. And what we're going to use here is a factual scenario that sort of rips from different cases we've had in the past based on a computer of our former employee. So in our factual scenario, or fictional scenario rather, which is factual, we change a lot of names. Sam Smith is a lead scientist at Superior Science, working on a very important treatment for Parkinson's disease. Sam feels, however, he's being devalued by his company, unhappy with the bonus he's receiving, and starts to look elsewhere for employment. It's the end of the year. He doesn't put in any advance notice that goes on a vacation to Florida in mid-January. Let's say he's in Pittsburgh, so it's a good place to go, of course, in mid-January. 6 days later, Sam resigns, returns his company issued device. Then shortly thereafter, his employer, Superior Science, hears Sam is now working for Second Best Labs, a competitor. And they want to know, was Sam up to something before he left? What can you tell us about his activity? A copy of his computer will give us the documents he had on his computer at the time he left, whether he downloaded some email, maybe some other files and metadata. But the forensic image will tell a much deeper story. So, example 1, the forensic image will pull from Sam's computer the documents he accessed leading up to his departure. Well, actually, it pulls all of it, but for purpose of the investigation, we'll focus on the last few weeks before he left. And here you see that the scientist on January 16th, the eve before his unannounced vacation, after work, 6:14 p.m. Eastern, accessed a couple of interesting documents. So he's going on vacation, but he accessed some lab tests and device results. And he also accessed from the company's server marketing material. So that alone raises a red flag, or it should. Why is a scientist looking at marketing material in conjunction with device results? And in addition, right before he goes on an unannounced vacation in the evening. So that's sort of like step number 1 in the analysis. We have proof here that he first opened these files at issue, about a year or so ago or 6 months ago. Then on even his unannounced vacation, he accesses 4 or 5 interesting files, at least interesting to the investigation. What else was he up to? All right, so around the same time that he opened these important files, 6:16 p.m. that evening, he puts in a thumb drive into that computer. Here's where it can get very interesting and strategic. Here we know Sam at 6:16 p.m. and 30 seconds put in a Lexar jump drive secure USB with a serial number that hadn't been plugged in for like 9 months, or I guess it's 4 months rather. So clients can take this one of two ways. You can take this metadata and strong arm Sam and say, hey, Sam, we know you put this thumb drive in, and we think it contains our information on it. Give it back to us. The other thing you can do is just say, we think you put a thumb drive into a computer. Send us back what you plugged in. And you'll be surprised what you receive. A lot of times a client does that for a former employee, and they send back a thumb drive they bought like at Best Buy the day before, not realizing this metadata is out there. And they try to trick the employer to say, here's your thumb drive back, but it isn't the one that was ever plugged into the PC, and we know it. So now you have someone trying to deceive the company as opposed to just stealing information from them. So we could talk you through some of those things, the strategy points, but you're putting together a timeline here of access and then USB insertion. You would need the actual USB drive to see what files are on the USB. But since you put a USB drive within seconds of opening a document, the conclusion there you can draw, I think reasonably so, was he was putting the USB drive in to take information with him. Step 3. What about the unallocated space on his computer? So in this scenario, Sam was accessing his personal email from his work computer. He didn't download any app or an account or anything like that. He just logged in, to your point, earlier question. We don't have access to the full account. We would need credentials for that, the administrative credentials and the password. However, oftentimes you access the internet. There is information on the hard drive of the computer used to access the internet about the metadata of what you were looking at, what you were searching for, what you're interacting with. So here what you see is a bunch of HTML code recovered from unallocated space on the computer, Sam's computer, where he was starting to email, piecing it together, Frank at Second Best. So here's December 30th, 2019, right when the bonus time came out. The night before he emails Sam, Sam emails him and responds back, how are things in Florida? Any opportunities at Second Best? Tired of the typical bonus BS. I won't spell out what BS means. You probably know it. But here, there's motive now here. And this is all pulled from deleted space on the computer. This actually was pulled from another example in a prior case we had a few years ago where the client was concerned that a certain group of employees left from a competing business at another enterprise. And they said, go back 60 days and see what they were doing. It turns out, we look back even further, 9 months before the departure, the employees were discussing the new business, even to the detail of picking up furniture for the new office space that they were going to establish. So much so that our client was accused in court of wiretapping the adversary because the information was so detailed, but it was all there in the deleted space on the work computer that they'd used to access their personal email account. So a lot can be done beyond the copy of the computer if you look at forensic imaging. Shifting to the other PC analysis here, this is more typical forensic analysis. This is metadata on a document. So here on Sam's PC, his resume was saved. You pull the resume up. The document itself, not just the computer, but the document itself, the file has metadata embedded in it. So here we see him updating his resume on January 1st, around the time he was looking to leave. And he hadn't touched it again for 4 months or so before that. And then lastly, his phone backup. So in this situation, Sam had iTunes on his computer. It was set to sync and back up his iPhone when plugged into his computer. Maybe he realized that maybe he didn't. But in this instance, he backed up a bunch of text messages to his work computer. And we have all of it. And so here in this scenario, he's texting Frank back and forth over Second Best about his CV. So you see the motive, the operation, the timing all works out pretty well, that there was ill intent here to take information and go to another company, all made possible by forensics. And this is just one small example. The iterations and scenarios are endless, but this is one example how you can leverage the delta to your benefit, Any questions about basic forensics, data mapping, or analysis before we move on to smartphones? Very good. Okay, so smartphones are becoming more and more ubiquitous in the workplace. A couple of just sort of practice pointers and best practices to keep your mind on. So in terms of step one, again, the forensic process is collecting the data. Step two is analyzing the data. So for collecting the smartphone, there's really two camps out there, of course, the iPhone world and the Android world. And there's various options available to collect them. Don't take that long, actually. Most phones, once you're hooked up to an imaging device, take a couple hours. So I'd say an iPhone, if you get it in our lab in the Frick building by 9 o'clock in the morning, it's done by lunch. Most iPhones, most Androids take a little longer, so by early afternoon. Again, there's outliers there. If the phone is 256 gigabytes with a bunch of videos and pictures, will take much longer. But a standard iPhone is around a couple hours to create the image. Android's a bit longer. A lot of times, though, folks are reticent to give up their phone. It's their lifeblood. How dare you take my phone away from me? And so there are remote options available for at least iPhones. So with iPhones, what you can do is send a forensic kit to the custodian. It's basically a laptop with forensic software on it. The person then backs up their phone to iTunes, and then the iTunes backup is pulled using the forensic software. So there's some involvement of the custodian there. Get on the phone with an analyst, they'll walk through, press some buttons, and then help back up their phone. That can be done as well. But there's an iTunes backup that can be done remotely without having the phone leave the person's hands. Another less foolproof option, but still maybe available, is iCloud backups. So if you're like me, if you're on power and plugged in and on Wi-Fi, your phone backs up to iCloud. That could also be done remotely if the custodian gives the analyst the temporary credentials, if they want to create a temporary password for the iCloud account, and they can pull forensic software, the iCloud. There's some limitations there. As an example, if you have multiple iPhones or iOS devices in your family, so you've got a couple iPhones for you and your significant other, and your kids have iPads, if your messages are set to sync across one another, then the iCloud backup won't work. The reason is the way it's architected technically, when you do that, if sync is enabled, the iOS messages go to a different location in the backup than the standard location. So just how Apple does it. And it takes a lot of manual time to get the data out. Where if it's not set to sync, it's in an easy location where the forensic software connects to it, just pulls it out. The sync is enabled, though, it makes it harder. Just a subtle nuance there. We always recommend for phones and tablets, have that in lab. That's the easiest, most defensible way. Second option is the iTunes backup. Third would be the iCloud. Again, if that iCloud sync is not enabled. Androids are a bit different. There are so many steps you have to take to remotely collect Androids. Toggle the switch, put this in developer modes, change the switch. It's very, very fraught with risk and error. And there's so many different, it's an open source platform, of course. So you have LGs and Samsungs and Pixels. There's just so many variants of Android phones that we don't touch remote collections. And people might do that, and that's fine, but we need those in hand to do it defensively and in a forensically sound way. So if you have a client need to collect their phone, number one course of action from a forensically sound perspective is dropping off at a lab, have it connected to the imaging device, this little box hardwired in, a couple hours, they're done. Second option for iTunes, there's a backup there, and the Androids, there's really no second option, it's defensible. So that's how to get the data off the phone. But what do you get from the phone? So the most common source of information that's sought are text messages, SMS or MMS or iOS messages. Watch out here for iOS messages. A lot of folks think that if you subpoena Verizon or Sprint or AT&T or the cell carrier, they're going to have all the text messages ever sent on the device. And that just isn't the case. As an example, if you're looking for iOS messages, so iPhone to iPhone or iPhone to iPad, the carrier will not have any record of those messages at all. They just don't record them. That's on Apple's side of the house. So those won't be a source of information for you. They would have and could have some SMS and MMS messaging. They would have metadata about them. On occasion, have the actual texts. But in most cases, what people really care about are iPhone to iPhone communications. The actual substance won't be with the carrier, it's going to be on the device. It's on a database on the device. If it's deleted, but also another watch out here. It doesn't necessarily mean it's gone forever. All that means is if you delete an iOS message, it goes somewhere else on the phone other than your iOS inbox until it's overwritten. So it's possible, again, through the forensic process, you can recover deleted messages. It's not a guarantee or ask to put a likelihood on it and a 50-50 chance. It really is, I would say, generally speaking, more likely to recover recent messages than older messages. However, there are cases where we've gotten a message back that was deleted 6 months ago and couldn't find one deleted a week ago. So it is kind of hit or miss there. But on balance, the more recent deletion activity, the more likely you are to get it back until it's overwritten by something else. Another common data source be notes on the phone, of course, videos and pictures that are taken, some application activity. And for example, our colleague asked about, Telegram and Signal, those sorts of things. Those messages can't be pulled off the phone using forensic tools unless you get a special software. Facebook Messenger, same thing. TikTok, mixed bag, it's a Chinese app. So it really depends on the app as to what you can get off the phone. And then browser searches. A quick story on that one. We had a case about a year ago involving school bullying, high school in the North Hills in Pittsburgh. So the cops show up at the alleged defendant's house, the accuser's house, with a screenshot of a printout from TikTok where the kid and her friends were making fun of another classmate, calling her all kinds of names. And the child told her mother, "This wasn't me. It was a joint account. My friends did that. It wasn't me. Yes, that was my account. I deleted it, but it wasn't me." So the mother retains us to see if her daughter's telling the truth, which is pretty refreshing in this day and age. Instead of saying my daughter's an angel, she said, "We'll see." So we imaged the smartphone, and we couldn't get back, because TikTok is a little tricky, the actual post that was screenshotted. But we did find in deleted Safari searches, can the cops find my deleted TikTok posts? She was searching for that. So she knew people were going to be looking for things she deleted, and we recovered that deleted search from her phone. And we also found other pretty nasty videos that were made towards other kids, not the victim at issue in this investigation with the police up north, but other things that were indicative of not so nice behavior. And so as a result, they did not call us to testify, because it would have been a good thing for the judge to hear this. They must have pled out. We kind of lost touch on that one. But just to give you a sense, fragments can be recovered. You're looking for an app, for example, maybe a browser search might shed light on what you're looking for. It's pretty robust what you can recover. But the application activity is a common ask. It's pretty all over the board, but getting better. As I mentioned in my earlier comments, as the app developers change their APIs and the connectors, the collection companies are playing catch up. Let's see here. Question in the chat. What if a company uses a platform such as Signal? Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, sorry.
This is the next one down.
Oh, I'm not seeing another one. That's the last one on my chat.
Oh, okay.
Maybe it hasn't refreshed yet.
Does the app eFix actually remove metadata from iOS pictures?
The question is, does the app eFix remove metadata from iOS pictures? Is that the ask? Yeah, that's a great question. I'll have to look that up. I've not had experience with that one. Our analysts probably have. And so my email will be at the end of the presentation. Send me your information and I'll find out for you. I don't know, off the top of my head, I honestly don't know, so I don't want to mislead you on that one. But I will find out. Question?
So far, we're talking about employees doing things. A more common event is a phishing or ransomware.
Yes.
What information can you gather about the perpetrator
Yes.
of a ransomware or phishing attack?
Great question. So the question from the audience here was, we focus so far in our examples on employment-like situations. What about if you have a phishing attack, a ransomware attack, where there's a threat actor that gains access to a network? And our company actually does cybersecurity incident response, and that's right in our wheelhouse as well. That depends on how sophisticated the attacker is. So a lot of times what you can figure out is at least the region from which the person was making the attack, although those can be spoofed. So it really depends on how sophisticated they are. We've had occasions where we've traced back at least a certain region in Europe or in the US, but if they're any good at what they're doing, it'll be very difficult to get a specific person or a specific IP address, because those could be spoofed and tricked with the server farms that they use. But what you can do is rule out certain actors. So as an example, and we have this many times recently, there's a financial transaction. Someone gets spoofed between a banker and a lender and a loaner, or recipient of funds, and someone wires $500,000 to pay off a note or to pay down a construction loan or something like that, and the money's gone. A bad guy got in somehow, and the receiving person never received the money, and the sending person swore they sent it to the right person, but they didn't. What we can tell you with the analysis is where the crack occurred. So we can prove, at least disprove, this person was at fault because at some point in the chain, someone outside the conversation got in, and here's what they got in. To chase it back to that specific person is often difficult, but at least it shows you there was an attack versus someone absconding or cheating or, you know, intentionally hiding information from somebody else. So that's one piece you can discern from that analysis. But it's often difficult to get a specific identity of the person doing that work.
Okay, so if you have trace it back to a region or a particular server, but that doesn't identify the actor, can you then subpoena the server?
You can try.
And have them provide additional information to get to the actor?
Yes, the question there is if you do have some generalized information about at least the network from which the person was operating or the ISP address, can you then subpoena the ISP provider or the hardware provider that the person worked on? And you can, yes. Again, even those persons can hide their identity, but you can do that. And that could show more information, that could yield more information for you in your investigation. And we've helped structure the technical ask of those subpoenas as far as what to ask for and the actual like analytical things you need. And oftentimes that does get you more information. So what can be pulled off of smartphones? We talked about big picture, what can be pulled off. And now what's the deliverable for lawyers to use? And so the three most common outputs from the phone are as follows. So output number one is typically an Excel report. And here's an example of a client caring about certain terms, which is column A, between certain numbers, which columns C and D, of course, the time is in column B, whether they're read or not, and then the body of the text. So this is the forensic pool from the phone of texts between certain individuals of certain numbers that hit on certain key terms. We can also color code. I mentioned a moment ago how you can sometimes get back deleted texts. So we can color code the extant messages with the messages that were recovered to give you a sense of what was on the phone, you know, initially, and then what was on the phone and gone. But a lot of times folks like this, because lawyers like Excel, it's searchable and you can manipulate it and you put it in chronological order how you want to order it. So a very common deliverable is a text report of communications. Second common output is called a UFDR report. This is a bit more robust. This is actually like a forensic report using our forensic tool. We use something called Celebrite, where this is pretty much what our analysts see, which we can give to a client via a link and walk them through how to use it. So here, as you see in the middle here, it's an iPhone XR. And then on the left-hand side, and even the content buttons over here, you can get a lot more than just texts. So there's chats, there's passwords, instant messages, application, social media, web history. So sometimes this is overkill and not needed, but if someone just wants to go, quote unquote, go through a phone, this could be a good option for them, where you have not just the text, but more the social media activity and the internet activity and the photos and the videos. And you click through each of these sub items and see what was on the phone at the time of imaging. Drilling down in the UFDR, here's an example of what the chats look like. So the spreadsheet I showed you a moment ago, this sort of replicates what the phone environment a little bit more. So on the right-hand side, the chat feature, the blue and green boxes, those are received and sent messages back and forth between the custodians of interest that you can hone in on. And then, of course, there's the timestamps and last activity of the chat in the middle there. So it gives you a more robust look at the phone, just when you show you what it looks like from a screenshot perspective from the forensic tool. And then thirdly, you can actually load chat data into an online review tool. We use a tool called Relativity. So we have a license that goes from Celebrite, which is the forensic tool, into Relativity, which is the review tool. This is an online cloud-based review tool. You're given sent your email address, you get a passcode, you log into your workspace for your case, and you see in the workspace all the emails and Word documents, whatever files you have, and texts. And the idea here is if you have to produce the documents to an adversary, Relativity is a great tool because you can search the data, and there's a coding layout on the side of the screen there, and decide, is this text responsive or not? Does it need further review? Is it privileged? What kind of privilege? Should it be redacted? Is it confidential? All that coding information can be modified for every case and fully customizable. These are just common layouts. But here the idea is you can search in Relativity, of course, organize your files, tag what's important, get a debate stamped in the tool, and produce your adversarial all at once with your other data. It's another option. Again, sometimes it's not needed to go that far, but sometimes folks have a lot of phone data to review, and the spreadsheets are cumbersome. So what's commonly not available on a smartphone? We mentioned this a couple of times already. Do are good questions. Encrypted messages are usually not available unless you have special software to get them off. Email conversations, for those, you need the actual email password, not the actual phone itself that was used to access the email account. Snapchat, Facebook Messenger, things like that, they're more ephemeral or just based on someone else's proprietary platform like Facebook, are likely not available. Again, that depends on the phone model, the version of Facebook that they have, the software update that they're on. So that's not it's hit or miss really. And then location data. A lot of times we're asked to piece together the whereabouts of somebody in criminal cases, family law cases, even employment cases, where we're somebody at a certain point in time. What we can help do, what forensics can help do, is using certain location data on the phone, coupling that with carrier records. I'll give you an example in a minute. You can put together literally a graphic and an animation of where someone was moving at a certain point in time. We had a case a year ago, criminal defense matter, where an individual was accused of an affair and then accused of murder with the person he had an affair with. And he claimed he hadn't seen the person in months. Well, it turns out we were able to figure out using forensics that he was located where her body was found, and then walking away from where the body was found, and then threw his phone in the river to hide the evidence. And we put together, because we had a backup of the phone was gone, got the backup, got the carrier records, and we were able to map his actual whereabouts, where he's walking to a specific point in time, walking down the hall, walking to a bridge, and throwing something in the river. It was pretty crazy. So it's not an easy process. It's not hit a button process, but pulling down the backup, you had photos, you had texts with location data on them, and photos with data prints on them. Then you have the carrier records with the cell pings, and you can put together through that a pretty detailed chronology of transportation or movement. Pretty wild stuff.
There's been a lot of Google litigation saying that Google is recording the location of individuals without their knowledge or consent. And there was a reason Attorney General said about that. And is that what you're talking about when you say carrier information?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
The question was, there's litigation regarding Google and unauthorized tracking of folks, and a lot of that could be gleaned from carrier records. Exactly. Yep. You can glean that from the carrier records in many cases.
So the government has access to the Google unlawful taking of your data, of your location.
In that situation, the government would either issue a request to Google or subpoena the carrier and get, of the person and get the metadata out of that location data. And the last piece of information on our data mapping and analysis is social media. So this one is really, and it depends answer, but big picture as lawyers, as non-technical folks, here's just key things to think about. If you need to collect social media and you're talking to someone with a tool that they say they claim to collect social media, here are questions to ask them. That's the idea here. How often is your software updated? What support do you have proven collection capabilities for? How is the information exported from your tool? So once you pull down the Facebook post, how am I given it? And here's some examples of tools that work fairly well. So X1 social for Facebook and Instagram and LinkedIn, Page Vault and Page Freezer, those are good for different websites. So these are pretty commonly known, fairly decent tools. But if you're talking to folks that do this work, just ask these questions. They might claim they can do the whole world for you, but if they don't have frequent updates and they don't have support for these main tools, then it's maybe a buyer beware there. Secondly, a lot of folks think, well, I have my phone. Won't that have all my posts and tweets and my likes? It may have some of that information, but usually not all of it, or usually not most of it. So if you're actually looking for Instagram likes or retweets, maybe it's comments on a Facebook wall. No doubt the most robust place for that is the actual account itself. And you might not get that voluntarily. That could be a subpoena if it's a third party, or an RFP, a motion to compel if it's a judge and a litigant, a party litigant. But we've had that too, where there's a class action recently. It's a public case regarding the mask mandate. And so a bunch of folks, plaintiffs were complaining about it. And so the defendant asked for the social media access and they said no, but they were given a motion to compel was granted. And we were collecting all their social media to see what they really were saying about it. So as an example, just make sure you're aware of the account itself being the most likely source, not just the phones or the computers that they use or the tablets that they use. And what can you expect? So once you do have a tool that does work and they extract a bunch of threads, maybe it's in Instagram or Facebook, what would you get? Typically it's a PDF, and you can batch them based on, comment. What we typically do is have a thread or a date, and we go a certain number above and below to get context. But a lot of them will export one big large PDF, which isn't that helpful. It's one massive document. You want to sort of cut it up. And so you should be able to talk to someone that actually has a tool that can actually segment it based on the topic that you care about, or at least the participants that you care about, and then put some parameters and buffer around those. Any questions about that? So we've talked about social media, phones, computers, and forensics. So we're going to shift over to eDiscovery for our last few minutes. Okay, so let's revisit our life cycle here. Sorry if the text is hard to read for folks on the Zoom, but now we're at the point where we're going to review as attorneys and analyze and produce information to our adversaries once it's already been collected. So the forensic piece, as I mentioned, is more investigative. The output's commonly a spreadsheet or a written report. We would issue like email reports, or actually reports for a judge to our clients to explain what they have. What of you as the attorney have to do the review and analysis of information. That's where eDiscovery technology comes into play. Here's just some examples of tools out there on the market. Relativity is one that we commonly use. Again, it's cloud-based. Your email is used to access it. You have a specific login. We'll give some examples there, but it's an online platform that can be used to search, call, and identify what's important for your case. The screenshot from that text was an example of that with the coding panel. So big picture, the other benefit of these tools is they have artificial intelligence built into them. So there's a couple examples there. Say you have a massive data set and you want to know just what's in the data set without even looking at it. In the old world, you have a bunch of bankers boxes. You go in a conference room somewhere and start looking with tape flags and looking at what you have. What the technology does now for you is you feed the data into the tool and it can cluster for you from day one without any teaching of the tool what's being talked about in the documents. It reads and scans the context and content and will develop for you basically concept clusters based on prevalence and based on concept and based on term, what's being talked about or what's being raised in the documents. You can also it helps you visualize the information. So it can help you put bar graphs together, and 80% is talking about this topic and 5% about this topic and so forth. We have a whole presentation on this concept, on this topic alone, so I'm just going over the high level. There's also structured analytics built into these tools. For example, say you have a bunch of emails you're collecting, and there's 30 custodians. Well, you don't want to go through all 30 custodians' emails necessarily, but wouldn't it be nice to have a tool that could take all the conversations from all 30 and put them in one inclusive thread, the most inclusive, so you're not looking at 28 different threads. The tools can do that for you. It could also help you find if there's near duplicates in a data set, as an example. Say you have a bunch of contracts to review, and there's a dispute over provisions in a contract. Well, the tool can go through the files using the hash values of the documents, which is basically an algorithm, a unique ID assigned to each document in the data set, and will tell you what's nearly duplicate. So it might be a final contract and red lines in the contract, comments in the contract, and batch all that together for you. So you see in one location what's nearly duplicative of one another. So these are just all examples of analytics built into these tools these days that can help you speed review, make sense of your data, and spend less time looking at junk. One case study where this came to life. So to me, the most robust tool, analytics tool within these platforms is called Continuous Active Learning, or CAL. And what CAL does for you, it's sort of like your Netflix queue, but for documents. So if you're watching Netflix and you like Stranger Things, Netflix will then say, hey, John, based on your viewing preferences, would this be a good show for you to watch? It'll feed you a show that you'd like. CAL does that, but for documents. And so what it does is you feed the documents into the tool, you start marking them as responsive or not. Based on what you coded, the AI then searches the remaining corpus you haven't yet looked at and says, what about this? We think this one is relevant. What do you think? And it relearns your decision over and over again, where it starts feeding you information faster and you spend way less time looking at junk. So it doesn't negate the need to review documents, but it speeds your review and negates the need to look at every single document in a data set. Here's how. This is an example. This is from a real case. So we had a second request. a year or so ago with a large company, reasonable data set, 34,000 documents, and it's decent. That's, 10 boxes or so. They did a basic keyword search and they pulled out of keywords they thought were relevant. The hits were 34,000 documents. Then we sampled that. So the experts in the case, the lawyers looked at that, looked at a few documents, said, okay. They went through about a box and said, only 10% of the docs that hit on our keywords were actually relevant, which means they would have looked at 10 documents to find one relevant document. If they did just a linear review, kept going without using technology. So the solution here in a tight time frame in particular was continuous active learning. So we fed the data into our tool, turned on the analytics function, and they started reviewing. So after reviewing like a third of the box, not even 500 documents, the amount that was deemed relevant jumped from 10 to 43% of what they were being shown. And then only after less than a box of documents, 2,000 documents, they were 83% relevance they were being shown. And that number is pretty critical. There's a lot of research out there. These studies go back about a decade. And if you need sites, let me know. Linear human review, lawyers in a conference room. It's been proven at best, find about 80% of the relevant documents in the data set. You're going to miss 20%. The federal rules don't call for perfection, never contemplated for perfection. So at best, using linear review, you're going to get 80. And actually, the studies show that lawyers get as little as 20% right. So the range is 20 to 80 you're getting out of a relevant set. Where here, using technology, using less than a box of documents, you're 83% in a matter of days. And so what happens is eventually, you're going to run out of relevant documents, and you can stop your review without having to look at everything, because the technology is front-loading the relevant documents to your review team. So here's a depiction of how that went. So first couple of days, of course, the lawyers call us to rush. We load the system, they don't look at anything for 2 days. That's the curse of being a supplier. But then they start looking at documents. And within 5 days, they have 83.5% relevance, which is pretty darn high, better than most linear reviews. And there's actually tests you can perform in the data set called illusion tests that you can then apply to the rest of the data set. And we had a case recently of a construction dispute where there are millions of documents, not thousands. And using the illusion testing, they stopped the review. They were getting no more relevant docs fed to them. And the testing showed using math and algorithms that if they kept reviewing the remaining 2 million documents, they might find 150 that were relevant. So in terms of proportionality in the federal rules, the client went to the adversary and said, look, we're done using this technology. Here's a methodology. They're very transparent. We're stopping review. If you want us to look at remaining million documents, 550 documents that are relevant, you're going to pay for a review. We're going to cost shift. And the parties negotiate a way out of it, and they could stop the review. So it's a way to leverage technology to speed things and look at what's most important. And again, the goal here is to get the reasonableness and responsiveness, but not perfection. It never will be perfect. You're never going to find 100% documents in your data set, no matter what tool that you use. And that concludes the presentation. I will pause, Lori, for you to come back up, or in case others have questions, but that's the crux of the presentation today.
Thank you so much, John. You make everything sound so almost simple when we know data is just overwhelming at this, juncture. So let me just say, I have your emails. So I will be looking up your and I have your name. So I will be getting the lawyer numbers, your attorney numbers, and sending in the CLE credits. You may call us at any time, doesn't have to be today, to pay for the CLE credits. Members only have to pay $10 a credit. Non-members, it's $25 a credit, and this is a 1-hour credit course. So does anybody have any questions or follow-ups? I'll be, is there one here? 2 on-screen attendance. I have the list of attendees. So is that the question? I do have the list. Since I created the Zoom meeting, I have the list of people's names that I emailed. Those of you who registered, I have your emails. and I can email his presentation so you can get it before then. But we'll also, since we recorded this, it'll take a little bit of finesse, but Nick will take care of getting this video up and usable, and we'll have the handout with that as well on our website, acllib.org. So anything else? Any other house cleaning issues? Okay, I want to thank everybody for coming. Thank you for telling us it's an excellent presentation. As always, we hope to do more with John because he is so knowledgeable and can share all that information with us. Okay, thank you for coming and take care. Have a good holiday if we don't meet again. The next CLE we have is, I do believe it's in December. It's on year-end tax review. It's very good with Fred Leckie. You may want to sign up for that one. That one's also going to be a hybrid, so you can do via Zoom and or in person. Okay, thank you and goodbye.